Hey everybody, welcome to Office Hours, brought to you by Higher Learning Test Prep and RemoteTutors.com. So we're going to talk about a few questions today, and I'm actually playing favorites. I have a new student coming online here, and Alexandria asked me to answer a few questions about the first practice test she did in ahead of time before our first lesson here. So I'm going to jump into 3 questions for Alexandria, and then 1 question that a student asked us via email about the essay. But let's jump right in here. I'm going to screen share. The vortex is coming. Here we go. Here's the vortex is now over. You're back on the chalkboard, hopefully with me. And this is a question from the first practice test. It asks about the main purpose of the first paragraph. And this is a really interesting one for which a lot of students struggle. A lot of students pick either A or B. And it's because of these words, culture and tradition. So we could read the first paragraph here. Akira came directly, breaking all tradition. Was that it? Had he followed form? Had he asked his mother to speak to his father to approach a go-between? Would she have been more receptive? Now, for context, this is a passage about a young man who asks for a girl's hand in marriage from the mom. And she does so in a surprising and untraditional way. These words are bait because we're talking about a culture and a tradition. But we don't describe the culture at large in this paragraph. That can't be the purpose. They would have to say way more. And they don't criticize the tradition, even though he goes against the tradition. Even though he breaks the tradition, he doesn't criticize. He doesn't say it's a bad tradition. This is a classic trap because the word question will show up every time you have a bunch of question marks, and 95% of the time it's wrong. I've seen it be right, I think, once I can think of. But there's questions 2 out of the 3 sentences in this paragraph. But there's no suggestion. And so to be clear, I'm not saying that these words are wrong just because they remind you of the theme. It's because people fall in love with these 3 words, and they sort of give the rest of the answer choice a pass, but it doesn't describe a culture, doesn't criticize a tradition, and it doesn't have a suggestion that we question. So it has to be analyze reaction. I don't love that answer, but it's the best answer. Certainly he's thinking about how his hopefully mother-in-law, if things went well for him, how she responded. Now, of course, you may be feeling like this is totally out of context. Go back and read the first passage in the first test, practice test 1 for the SAT. You'll find this stuff, and hopefully this will be helpful. Bait answers like culture, tradition, and question. Just because it's half right doesn't mean it's fully right. Just because it's half perfect doesn't mean it's right. You make sure you're trying to cross answers off as you go. That's the name of the game as you work through reading questions. Okay, so we're going to move right along to a couple other questions for my new student here, Alexandria. And if you guys have any questions, I hope you'll share those questions with us. We're happy to talk about anything that you're wondering about on this test. And this is not just for new students, it's for college counselors, and parents, and for people who don't work with us but just want a little bit of advice. Please send us your questions. In the meantime, this number 26, Alexandria was wondering about, has to do with punctuation rules. So some quick rules about punctuation. Independent clause means something like full sentence, something that could be a full sentence. You need that if you're going to use a colon. And because this sentence, the spaces are usually stocked with standard office equipment, that could be a full sentence. But the answer choices like B and C, which use colons, tack on this phrase such as. So ask yourself, if you walked into a room and said, spaces are usually stocked with standard office equipment such as, would people know what you're talking about? I mean, not really. They'd be wondering where your statement was going to end because this phrase such as sort of leaves it dangling at the end. So cross those off because you can be disciplined and say that you need an independent clause first. By the way, you don't need an independent clause after. You could do either an independent clause or a dependent clause. Literally anything you want after. Just what comes before is an independent clause. And a nice little hint is you could use phrases like namely or even such as or for example. These are phrases that can take the place of the colon. Something like an example, for example. So to be clear, if you got rid of the word such as, this would be perfect. The spaces are usually stocked with standard office equipment, namely photocopiers, printers, and fax machines. I just replaced namely with the colon. So that would have been great, but we can't do that because we don't have that option. We have to pay attention to exactly what we're given. We can't change any other details. Now, the other thing to say is that comma rules are pretty complicated, but typically there's two things to remember. Simple is better than complicated. Simple is best. So if you're just wondering just on those terms, you could say, well, answer choice D has 2 commas. Answer choice A has only the 1 comma, so I'm going with A. A is the right answer. The reason it's right technically is what we've done is use a comma to separate the independent clause. Spaces are usually stocked with standard office equipment, full sentence, comma, and then extra stuff afterwards, dependent clause. There's no need to put a pause on either side of the comma, even if you kind of read it like such as, comma. That's okay for you to feel that pause, but the best thing for me to say on a simple level is that less is more. The simplest answer is best. And I'm happy to explain in any greater detail that you want. If anybody has any questions about that, please email us. I'm happy to get into greater detail. But let's move on to one more math question because this one's pretty interesting. Let's see here. I think it was this one. Notice I'm avoiding the vortex today. Getting better at this stuff. Avoiding the vortex. You just don't get to see my ugly mug in between explanations. Nevertheless, here we are on number 27. This is from also practice test 1, and this is a question in the calculator section. And this one's really interesting because it feels pretty damn easy. So if you're near the end of the test, this is a 1 through 30 multiple choice and then 31 through 38 grid-ins. So they get harder as they go in each format. So 27 right now, right down near the end of this section of 30 should be kind of hard. If it isn't hard, it's at least easy to get wrong. And you want to use the answer choices to help you clarify what's going on. So immediately I jump to the answer choices and I notice it's a factor of 10, right? Times 10, 150 times 10, 1500 times 10 is 15,000, 15,000 times 10 is 150,000. So obviously that's a thing. The other thing to say is that oftentimes, even though we have a calculator, estimation is enough. You know, so this question says that there's a field and the students mark off regions in the field and they measure to find how many earthworms there are. And they say, what's a reasonable approximation that will let you know what we're doing? And these answer choices do too. It's not like we're going to approximate off by 100 or 1,000 or something. So how many earthworms are there beneath this entire field? And here's what happens to folks. You know, the average of this stuff is roughly 150. Each of these regions has about 150 in it. So that's what this answer is, but we're not talking about a region, we're talking about a whole field. Most people pick B because they say, well, there's 10 of these. A, B, C, D, E is 5. F, G, H, I, J is another 5. 10 total fields. And then they say 150 per field times 10 groups, 10 regions is 1,500. But you have to ask yourself about these other answer choices because if it's number 27, it is going to be easy to get wrong. And what we just did felt pretty damn easy. So we have to, at least we know why people would pick A. But the best way to check your work is not to just keep talking to yourself about how you're so smart and you got it right, but to say like, well, what are these traps? How is somebody going to be off by a factor of 10 or a factor of 100? How is that going to happen? Ultimately, what happens in this question is that way back at the beginning, they tell you that the field is 10 by 10 for an area of this field is 100 square meters. And then each of these regions is 1 by 1. So there's 100 regions in this field, even though we've only measured 10 of them. So if there's 100 regions times 150 on average per field, and remember, we didn't have to calculate that. We could just estimate it because we could say, well, I don't know, there's a bunch of stuff. There's one low one, but a bunch of them in 130, 140 range, some 150s, a couple above 150. So it's about 150 for our purposes. We don't have to calculate that. There's 100 of these, so that's 15,000. I mean, I think what happens with D is that people just, you know, maybe they think this field is bigger than it is, or maybe there's some sort of a calculation issue. But I can at least understand why people are off by a factor of 10 in either direction. And I know that there's at least 2 trap answers. I don't totally understand D, and just to be clear, that's the wrong answer. The right answer is 15,000, 150 in each region times 100. Because there's 100 of these sized regions. The field's 100 meters for an area, and each region is 1 square meter. So, all right, so I hope that helps Alexandria, and I hope that helps a bunch of you folks as you're studying for this test. And it gives you a little sense of what we're doing on this exam. What we saw is that there's some traps in the reading section that you want to be really careful about. If you see keywords, just don't let that be everything. Just because you have one answer that you feel like half the answer, like a word like culture or tradition is good, or there's a bunch of question marks, so the word question, make sure you focus on the other half. Just because it's half right does not mean it's fully right. So process of elimination is your best friend here, because the least shiny, least fancy looking answer ends up being correct. And oftentimes, so the vaguest, least tempting answer, oftentimes, that's hard to get around, but you need process of elimination to do that. That was reading. In grammar, what we saw is that we need a solid sense of what constitutes a full sentence and what doesn't. And I didn't really get into that in detail, but one little trick you can use is to, I sort of alluded to this, but didn't fully explain it. I like to see if something's a full sentence by posing this hypothetical situation. Say your best friend, someone that knows everything that's going on in your life, is in a room and you walk into that room. If you were to say to them, hey, they're here, or it happened, hey, it happened, your friend would know what you're talking about, right? It happened is a sentence. They're here is a sentence. They're very short, simple sentences. So if you're going to test out something as a full sentence or not, you can pretend you're walking into the room. Hey, I've got to tell you something. Your friend goes, what is it? And then you say, the spaces are usually stocked with standard office equipment, such as. Your friend's like, finish what you were going to say, right? Your friend's wondering why you stopped where you did it. You didn't fully tell them something, right? And so if it doesn't feel like you fully told your friend something, it's not a full sentence. That's a useful little skill. Maybe a heuristic is the word for that. That means a strategy that works, even if it's not the most straightforward approach. You just know it's going to work. That's a heuristic. So you could. One more thing to say about grammar is that notice that we had a full sentence. The spaces are stocked with standard office equipment. That's a full sentence. But as soon as you add extra information, that changes everything. So it is possible to make a sentence longer and wreck the fact that it was an independent cause. That's kind of an interesting idea. And please, if you have any questions about that, ask me. I'd be happy to help. And then we saw that math question, and that was a really important math question for everyone who's studying for this test, because it's not a hard question. And you don't have to think every question near the end of the test is hard, but square up to the answer choices. Why is it here? Why is this a question that's going to determine if someone goes to an Ivy League school or not? It doesn't look hard. So what's the deal, right? And how do you do that? You use the answer choices and analyze them. That's not going to be easy to do if you've never practiced it in your own time when you go to the test. So you have to spend some time before you've taken this test, like in practice, not just doing time sections, but also moving slowly and asking yourself questions about answer choices. Even when you get something right, you want to be able to understand why the other answer choices are there. It's a great way to check your work. Okay, so that was a summary of the questions we saw in multiple choice. I was asked one other question by a student, and it was about how to write a good essay. And that's a really complicated question, but I'm just going to give you a couple of pointers. First of all, mark up the page when you're reading. So on the SAT, you're going to be asked to analyze somebody else's writing and say why it's persuasive, right? It's usually some essay from a magazine or a newspaper or something. Mark up the page. Everything that you think is persuasive, circle, star, make a little note. The student had asked if they should use, if it's exactly the same as rhetorical analysis essay in AP classes. And the one thing that's different is you don't feel like you have to use the words like ethos, logos, and pathos. You don't have to say those things. You can just talk about the ideas in an informal way as long as you're thorough in that explanation. You're graded on 3 fronts. You're graded on your ability to understand the passage. They call that the reading score. Your writing, so obviously how well you write, but they don't care if you make an error every once in a while with punctuation or you misspell a word. That's fine. It just has to be clear and effective. And then lastly, analysis. And that's the big one. And I want to talk about that really briefly. Again, there's so much to talk about with the essay. So if you guys have some specific questions about the essay, I'm happy to go into greater detail. But just to speak briefly to this analysis piece, most people lose points here. They see where, your task is show us the best examples of how this author has been persuasive and why that stuff was persuasive, right? So Most people do a good job of organizing some sort of 5-paragraph essay style. You don't have to do that, but that's a great method. And you say something like intro, first idea that was great, second idea that was great, third idea that was great, conclusion. Or you might talk about 3 different concepts that are in play, like, how the author uses statistics, how they use emotional language. There could be multiple mini examples in each of those categories. But the big thing I want you to do is think of the annoying younger sibling example. So that may sound weird, but if you have a younger sibling, you might be familiar with this idea of why, right? So you're on your way to a store. Why? What are we doing? We're going to the store. Why? Because we need some more clothes. Why? Because you grow fast and we need more clothes. Why? Well, because your metabolism is so strong because you're a little kid. Why? I don't know, because that's the way human bodies work at a young age. Why? Gosh, like now we're getting into like deep biological questions, maybe even spiritual or religious questions on our way to just get a new pair of jeans or something, right? That sounds random, but what I'm talking about is if you ask yourself why that example is useful, right? Here's this author used statistics. Well, you can say why. Well, the statistics help them prove a point. Like, well, why? Well, because this statistic from the National Endowment of the Arts shows what the author is trying to say in no uncertain terms. Well, why does that matter? Well, because with an absence of statistics, the author might not seem like they're making a solid case for themselves. Well, why does that matter? Well, because the emotional language that fills the rest of the piece needs to be grounded in those facts, right? And by using the statistics when they did, the author might have really helped to persuade those that disagreed with him or her that this person had a point, right? So I just got way further down the line by asking myself why. And what I would invite you to do is, even if you feel like you're already answering the question of why, ask yourself how, or ask yourself who cares, or what does this matter, right? Ask yourself one more question. See if you can add an extra sentence that goes a little bit deeper into talking about the function, purpose, meaning of your example. If you can do that, you're going to do really good. Also, see if you can use transitions. Transitions are key. So speaking of transitions, I'm going to transition into a lesson with a student right now. That was probably not the best transition, but you get the idea. So what I'm trying to do is say that think about how you speak with someone and how you move from one idea to the next. It doesn't have to be perfectly smooth, but make an effort to create a meaningful transition between paragraphs. If you do those 2 things, why, that is the annoying younger sibling is asking you, who cares about this example? Why does it matter? Why are we going to the store? Right? If you can use that to your advantage, I think you're going to write a better essay. And if you can do that and transitions, then you're going to be way ahead of the game. If you use a couple fancy words, try the word juxtaposition. You're going to be so sick of that word when you're done with college, but heading into college, the word juxtaposition, the author juxtaposes this idea and this idea. It means puts 2 ideas in relation to each other in an interesting way. Or try the word coalition building. That phrase is a really good one. Coalition building means bringing groups together, right? Groups that aren't usually the same, building a coalition of different groups. Okay, so I thank you all for joining us. We're here for you, and we're going to do this most weekdays as best we can. So please keep the questions coming, and it doesn't matter if you're a student of ours or if you're not a student of ours, if you're a parent, if you're a guidance counselor, if you're a teacher, whomever. We just want to get more information out here for you folks and give everybody a chance to ask questions to an expert, even if you can't afford, our rates, or if you don't have time to do the kind of work that we ask our students to do. So, the best way to study is with an expert one-on-one for a long time. But if that doesn't work for you, or if you are working with one of our tutors, if you need just a hint about something or just a little explanation halfway between the week, if we're going to see you in 5 days, please send us a question. We'd be happy to answer it. And what you'll be doing is providing an opportunity for other people who might come along and have the question later to get some clarity. So once again, our company is Higher Learning Test Prep, and our other company is Remote Tutors, remotetutors.com. And both of those places are the best places for help for the SAT. We offer a guarantee that almost nobody else does in this industry, which is if we'll set up a course for you, and if you do the full course and you do all of your homework and you show up for all the meetings, then you're going to reach your goal. And if you don't reach your goal, we'll work with you for free until you do reach your goal. It's super bold. Nobody else does it. The reason we do it is because we really believe in what we're doing, and we think we know that we can help. We've been doing this for years, and we know that this works. We think that there's no accountability in this industry, and there really should be. You should know that if you pay to work with somebody, that this person believes in the guidance they're giving you and believes that you can get where you're trying to be, right? I think that's important. So if you want any other information, feel free, reach out, just comment in the YouTube videos, wherever you want. Just get in touch and we'll be happy to help. And we'll probably see you maybe tomorrow, but definitely next Monday. Take care.